Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Danica Novgorodoff and Meera Subramanian. Danica is a visual artist, writer, and MacDowell Fellow. Meera is a journalist, and for years they've been collaborating on a graphic novel about youth activism and climate change. We're excited to be with them today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
Danica and Meera, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you. Can you please each tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm Danica Novgorodoff, and I'm a graphic novelist, an artist, and a writer. And I've been making books for about 20 years, mostly graphic novels, but I've also made some children's books. And a couple years ago, I published a cookbook with a New York City chef. So all kinds of projects.
What is your cookbook about?
Rice. It's all rice recipes from around the world. And I collaborated with chef J.J. Johnson, who lives in Harlem in New York City. And yeah, I co-wrote it and I did illustrations for it. And it was a different project than what I usually do, but really fun.
So you're not new to the collaboration game.
No, I've collaborated a bunch of times with different kinds of people and especially with writers. And sometimes I write for myself as well.
And why rice?
Well, J.J. Johnson has a restaurant in New York. Actually, he has several restaurants now, and they're all focused on rice bowls. It's kind of like fast, casual, really healthy, delicious rice bowls. So he was working on this cookbook all about rice recipes and looking for someone to help him write it. So I joined the project.
And Meera?
Yeah, my name is Meera Subramanian, and I'm a freelance science journalist, and I've been doing this for about 20 years, too. And I wrote a book about India. I do a lot of long-form narrative nonfiction for magazines and newspapers, and have really focused on the environment and climate for a long time.
Is this your first time working on a collaborative project with someone?
Yeah, it really is. Journalism can be really solitary. I mean, the fun part is when I'm out in the field reporting, which is what I do a lot. So then I get to go talk to everybody. But then after that, you're kind of just home working by yourself. And, you have collaboration in terms of working with an editor. And I've done stories where I have a videographer or a photographer alongside, and that's been really nice. But this was the first real long-form, long-term collaborative project, and I'm totally hooked.
How do you navigate, being a journalist, but also working on long-form books? And which one is your favorite?
I like the balance of going back and forth between them. It is kind of fun to have the shorter term pieces where you're kind of just really focused on something, and then it goes out into the world and you just get that satisfaction. And Danica and I have been working on this book for a long time.
Forever.
Forever and a day. And so it's so satisfying, finally seeing it emerge. But there is something about the quick jolt of just doing a piece and having it done in a couple months or something.
Instant gratification. Yay.
And how did you two meet?
We met through mutual friends who are also writers. We have one friend that I met through an artist residency, and he connected us when I was looking for someone to bounce ideas off for this project. And so he suggested I contact Meera. And then we actually ran into each other at another friend's book release event in Brooklyn. And Meera was kind of like, hey, are you still looking for someone to collaborate with you on this book? And I was like, yes. Are you interested? Please. I need help.
Yeah, that was so lucky. It was one of the events before the pandemic really shut everything down. I think it might have been the second to last like live event that I went to. And it just shows how valuable those happenstance interactions that we have, how they can really like change the trajectory of your life. Like it was so great. I remember that conversation in a loud bar in Brooklyn after the event with Danica. And it was just like, let's talk.
So before we talk about the current project, can you each take us back and tell us about how you became involved in the creative arts and narrative? How did you begin, and how has your work evolved over the course of your career?
Yeah, I've worked in painting and art for so long. I started working on comics kind of right after college. I majored in painting, and my paintings were always very narrative and kind of inspired by literature. And then I also kind of on the side liked to write stories that were very visual. And then I had a friend in college who was really into comics, and I had never really read comics that much as a kid. But he kind of introduced me to it, and I was like, oh, there's an art form that could combine this interest in narrative with my interest in the visual arts. And so I started making my own books and telling my stories visually. And I got a job. My first job in New York when I moved there in my early 20s was working for the publisher that actually is publishing our current book. So I did graphic design for them and made a lot of connections in the literary world and in the graphic novel world. I started really focusing on books and graphic novels at that time. And I kind of always thought of myself more as a visual artist. Over time, it's kind of changed a little bit more towards like, oh, I'm also a writer. And then in the last maybe a few years, because I've been so focused on drawing this book and drawing a couple other projects, I feel like I've kind of shifted back over towards the visual side. So it kind of comes and goes. It's like which I'm working on more at the moment.
When you say the paintings that had a narrative element, can you describe what you mean? Because a lot of people think of visual art as static and narrative as dynamic. And how do you reconcile those two within a painting or a drawing or an image?
Yeah, like for example, I have in my mind one of my paintings that I made maybe junior or senior year of college that kind of told a story from Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. So it was just this scene that I had in my mind of these mules on a mountainside in the desert, things like that, that were visualizing a story that really stuck with me. Or another project I did was a series of prints that kind of integrated poetry with images. So a lot of my artwork is drawn from poems or from books that I've read or stories that I make up, and they kind of work in a sequence to tell a story.
That's really cool. And Meera?
I guess from when I was a kid, I loved drawing and I loved reading. Those were like two things that I just loved to do. And I wasn't really into comics very much either. My dad's from India, so actually the most familiarity I had with comics was like a lot of the Hindu stories are depicted in comics. So I would come across those even more on my trips there to see family than I would comics in the US. But I was a quitter a lot. Like I would like play flute for a year and quit. I'd play piano for a year and I'd quit. I'd do sports and then I'd quit. But I did art lessons for a lot, but the books were always drawing me in. And then I got really attached to thinking about environmental issues like when I was 19, when I was still in college, and went straight into nonprofit environmental work all through my 20s. And so I was actually just reading for fun and I was writing for newsletters and that kind of thing. And by my early 30s, I was doing a zine with girlfriends out in the woods in Oregon. For like 4 years, we just did this, and it was like so much fun, like a little bit of drawing and a lot more writing. And I started actually writing things that I would like rewrite. For a long time, I didn't realize like, oh, you can write something and then it's not done. Like it took a while for me to realize that. And I always had this idea that you're like born a writer. And it took me until I was like 32 to realize like maybe I can go to school and become like a better writer. I had dabbled with art just like for fun. And I just kind of put that aside and really focused on the writing. And so that's where I've been putting my energy, is to craft stories that have a very strong narrative element. But it was fun because when I was working on scenes for this, writing in such a different style, like a short, compact style, I was trying to draw back on that visual background that I had. But then Danica would just knock them out of the park in terms of how they actually came out.
A lot of people are hesitant to collaborate with others, especially strangers. How did you both build the trust to collaborate with each other?
I think the best decision I made on this book was to realize my limitations and to ask for help. I don't have a background in science. I don't have a background in journalism, really. So bringing Meera onto this project was like the best choice I could have made. We have been talking continuously through the project and helping each other edit and giving each other feedback. And it's just been such an amazing collaboration in that way that we've had this constant dialogue about the project and have been able to inspire each other and to keep each other going through the long, hard haul. There's been many months and years where we're just like waiting on the legal team to get back to us from the publisher, waiting for the people that we want to interview to get back to us. And it can be kind of a slog, but having someone to work with is so nice, especially when I'm used to working by myself for years at a time without much feedback. It's been great.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. Like, it's just been such a genuine pleasure working together. It's got this weird thing where we met in that bar after the book event in February or January or something, 2020. And then Danica, you and I have not been in the same room since then. This has been
That's true. Yeah.
all just remotely going back and forth. But I think that communication is the key.
I love the concept of accepting one's limitations, and being willing to look for other people to work with, and also communication as the beginning of any relationship, whether collaboration or even a human-to-human relationships.
Yeah, and I think one thing that probably has helped is that neither of us have a huge ego. That, some writers might bristle at sharing a project in that way, but I think we both are pretty excited to work together.
Can you talk about the actual nuts and bolts of your collaborative process? How much of the book was already done by the time Meera came on board? And then how much of that did you have to take apart and rebuild from the ground up? Do you brainstorm before you create a scene or a chapter?
I had a concept for the book when I started, and sort of a vague idea that I wanted this to be about youth climate activists and also tell some of the basics of climate change and the basics behind the science of it. But I was really struggling to put together a structure for the book and a uniting factor that could make it engaging and tell human stories. And so Meera really took over the entire writing process. She made it work. I also felt like I had to do 10 years of research before I could be ready to write something like this. And Meera has already had all that background, so she really took over that aspect of it. And I usually like to wait until we have a really solid, tight script before I start drawing a project, because the drawings take me so long. I can only do, maybe a page a day or half a page a day of drawing. So I don't want to draw a bunch of things that then we're like, oh, we're going to cut that scene, and then I have to throw out a week of work or something. So I kind of waited for Meera to craft the entire script, and we went and edited it together a little bit, and then I started drawing once that was complete.
Yeah, I remember, Danica, when we first met, you were just like, I'm writing, but it feels like a textbook. Like I'm trying to. And I had just maybe a year or two earlier finished Richard Powers' The Overstory, which was like one of my favorite novels. And the structure that he uses is like that there's 6 or 7 different characters, and the whole beginning of the book is just these independent novellas where you almost have no idea how these people's lives interact. And then one by one, as you get like a third of the way into the book, they start, like I picture it like soap bubbles, like kind of like two bump into each other and attach, and then their lives all come together in different ways. And I think I still had that like floating around in my head. So I remember asking Danica, like, if you want to work on youth climate activists, what can you tell me? And she told me that she'd been to this climate strike in New York City that was basically led by youth climate activists. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a perfect hook. Let's just use that as the anchor for this entire structure, and let's find kids who were behind that. Like, how did they come to be up there on stage talking to hundreds of thousands of people when they're 15 years old? That's amazing. Let's find those kids, and maybe they can be our way in. And that really ended up working. I mean, it took a lot of work to find the right kids and to make contact. But that structure that I totally stole from Richard Powers' The Overstory, of like individual people, and then you kind of flash back to like, what brought this person to this place today?
So, you know how sometimes you read a book and you love it, and then you see the movie and you respond either really positively or really negatively to the casting? Like, either you're just like, oh yeah, they got exactly the right actor for this part, or just like, no, this person does not look like that, they don't talk like that. How did you make sure that the verbal and visual characterization was consistent and that you both were satisfied with it?
I mean, we interviewed the kids, and both Danica and I were there, so we both had in our head who this person is. And I did so much other research, like one of the kids had written a book, so I read the book, and I was just putting on my research reporter hat when I was crafting scenes. But Danica, you did such incredible homework in terms of the visuals too, of like really making sure you got them right. And so it felt like it just kind of came together.
Yeah, I definitely compiled files on each of them with pictures of them from their social media accounts and pictures of them at the event. And I took screenshots when we interviewed them so that I could try to capture what they look like. That's kind of the biggest challenge for me in making a graphic novel, is creating the characters so that they look like themselves, but also are kind of stylized or, kind of made into a little bit of a cartoon so that they can look the same in every single panel over the course of 200 pages so that they're recognizable and they have a kind of a personality on the page. So I did character sketches before I started drawing and really tried to work out their visual style.
How did you come up with the structure that lets you pack all the information in?
Yeah. I mean, you do learn tricks as a journalist of like how much can you embed information in the story itself. And then sometimes there's just so much you need to convey. And climate change is this big, huge thing. There's all these different aspects to it. So I don't even know, Danica, I think it was just us spitballing to figure out, like, we want to get these information dumps in there. So we're thinking about them as interludes. And why don't we make, like, we called it Mini Danica and Mini Meera. So, like, we're at this dramatic scene where like wildfires or floods are happening. And Danica's like, wait. Let's back up. What even is climate change? Like, I'm going to call my friend Meera. She's a science journalist. And then it's the little us in conversation. So you have like a little sub-narrative with us. We pause the dramatic stuff that's happening to the youth in their earlier lives. And then we have these interludes that were like, get into the climate science, and we get into like all these different aspects that are all intertwined in understanding what's at play.
Well, I'm curious. On the one hand, as you said, climate change is a vast topic, and yet environmental disruption extends beyond climate change. There's also all of the pollutants that leak into the environment. There's light pollution that disrupts circadian rhythms. Those things also are altering ecosystems. So how did you choose on the one hand to take on everything that falls under climate change, and at the same time, how did you choose not to tackle other elements? Like, you've chosen a certain level of analysis. How did you choose that particular level instead of trying to take on more or less?
Mostly it was Danica being like, I'm going to be painting forever. I definitely wrote too long a manuscript initially. And so, yeah, I think we just tried to make sure that there was a climate connection even as we reached out and explored other things. And we tried to acknowledge, even like, for example, there's a section on wildfires and climate is a component, but there's also pest infestations that are killing off trees. There's also land use changes, and there are all these other things. So if there was something that seemed relevant, we would get it in there, even if it was just a brief mention.
We tried to keep the interludes related to the kids' stories. So, have it kind of feel like a natural segue from one of their stories. For example, the extreme weather one of them was experiencing goes into the interlude about extreme weather. And one of our subjects practices Hinduism. And so what he had to say about how we're all children of God and related and interconnected in that way segues into the religion interlude. So we wanted it to have a natural flow as well and not just go off on totally random stories about or interludes.
So we always ask guests to read. I don't know if that's feasible given the graphic narrative format. Do you think it is? I'll defer to you.
Maybe we just go back and forth between box and box. Does that work?
Whichever works the best for you guys.
Okay. The more I learned about climate change, the more I felt like Jamie. Most of my writing turned into long journal entries about how much anxiety I was feeling. I didn't have a clue how to channel my anger and fear. As I learned how enormous the climate crisis was, how it was already happening now, and how it interconnected in so many other issues like racial justice, poverty, political corruption, education, violence, migration, the idea for this book was born. And this is an image of me shaking my fist at an airplane in the sky. Don't you know you're killing the honeybees with your carbon? But the more I learned, the more I got really freaked out.
Meanwhile, I had recently finished writing a book about environmental issues in India. I realized that every single issue I cared and wrote about, wild animals and old trees, healthy food and clean water, the lives of marginalized people struggling to survive, all threatened to get so much worse because of climate change. Each new story I'd work on would teach me more and more about how bad things were getting.
I was drawing and drawing.
And I was reporting and writing.
But too often, it didn't feel like it was enough.
We weren't alone. And then we step into an interlude, what to do about ecological grief. And this whole section has come right after one of the youth is having a really, really hard time coping with all of the wildfire smoke that's in her hometown. Ecological grief, sometimes called eco-grief or eco-anxiety, is an emotional weight related to the effects of climate change.
Those effects can be direct, such as being a victim of extreme weather events and disasters.
Or maybe you're a climate scientist whose research keeps revealing more dire outcomes, or a climate activist learning about one more failed policy.
Or maybe you're just a human with a beating heart, worrying about the future for yourself and everyone you love.
The effects can be mild, from numbness to denial.
Or incapacitating, including depression, thoughts of suicide, and post-traumatic stress after climate-related events.
Or they can be subtler, like simmering anger or anxiety, or an unplaceable sense of despair.
Often there's a feeling of loss. Solastalgia is a word coined by Australian eco-philosopher Glenn Albrecht to describe being homesick for a place that is still there, but transforming so quickly that it already feels lost to you.
The dominant mainstream culture often tries to turn these feelings into some sort of personal failing.
They're not.
As the Indian philosopher J. Krishnamurti is believed to have said, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Then in 2017, I had a baby. One new life on the planet. I never regretted having a baby, but I was terrified that I had made the wrong choice and that she would not be safe in the future. She also made me feel more connected to the history of humankind and more responsible for its future survival. Then it shows images of my ancestors and my two babies. I would give anything to ensure a livable future for her and her sister, and for their little ones, if they ever have children of their own. The years 2050 and 2100 do not seem so distant anymore. I hope my daughters will still be alive in 2100. The year after my first daughter was born, a man set himself on fire in Prospect Park, not far from where I live in Brooklyn. His name was David Buckle, a prominent gay rights lawyer and director of a city composting program. In an email he sent to the media beforehand, he explained his suicide as the ultimate protest against climate inaction. He said, "My early death by fossil fuel reflects what we are doing to ourselves." His protest suicide shocked and saddened me. I didn't ever want to feel like what David did was the only way to protest. As I learned about ecological grief, I discovered that I wasn't alone.
You're definitely not alone. A recent survey of young people from around the world showed that more than half thought that humanity is doomed because of climate change. These feelings are completely natural. I experience them too, and so does everyone I know who recognizes the climate crisis. Some of those feelings led me to decide I didn't want to have a child. It's a personal choice that we all need to make for ourselves.
So true. Sometimes the climate crisis feels like an assault on everything good and hopeful in the world. But our response reveals who we are, don't you think?
I do. Despair is the dark side of the light of love, right? They're like twinned emotions. It can be really hard, but it feels like it's an inseparable part of being alive. To care deeply about the natural world is to fear losing it.
And climate change makes it feel like we're at risk of losing everything we love. I sometimes wonder if humans will even survive.
I know, and humans are animals too, and we cannot live without all the other life on Earth. We're so connected, and if the other living beings aren't doing well, then neither are we. Polar bears became the iconic animal to symbolize climate change, but focusing on the polar bear can make the climate crisis seem like a faraway problem, something that hurts distant animals more than humans.
In truth, living beings large and small, those who fly and hop, swim and saunter, even those who are rooted in one place, are all affected by a changing climate.
Then we get into a whole section about biodiversity, but that's so gloomy.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I don't think so. Thank you so much. It was really nice to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Keep in touch.
Yes, will do. Take care.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.